All righty, we are going to have some more people join us possibly along the way, but let's get started. This is Cultivating Ideas, which is a series we have created this year for our faculty to share with you as practitioners ideas that they are excited about, that they are learning about, that they think will benefit you in your practice of ministry and service, wherever that might be. Before we jump in, I want to make you aware of something that's starting on Wednesday of next week. And at 1 o'clock, I'm convening a conversation group for 5 weeks called Talking the Times, Finding Connection at the Edge. So this is for people who are doing ministry that is church adjacent, that is non-traditional, or where they feel particularly lonely. And I would love to have you join. It's on our website if you're interested. All right, without further ado, let me introduce to those of you who don't know him, Timothy Lincoln. Timothy Lincoln has been a faculty member and library director at Austin Seminary since 1994, and that was back in the 20th century, y'all. He's been here a long time. This workshop about silent brainstorming is very much in keeping with the creative ideas that he has brought to the seminary throughout this time. He's a graduate of Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, Yale Divinity School, Simmons College, and the University of Texas at Austin, where he received his PhD in higher education administration in 2009. He was trained in and has used qualitative research methods, including this silent brainstorming method he'll talk about today, to study topics from what it's like to go to seminary to how students write term papers. And we are especially grateful to have Timothy with us because he's retiring at the end of this academic year. And so it'll be harder for us to compel his attendance and compel him to teach, but we hope we'll still be able to do that. Timothy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa, for that introduction. I'm a little uncomfortable with the compelling part, but I am going to share my screen. Is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for taking time out of your day to learn about this qualitative research technique. I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes or so, and I'm going to have PowerPoint slides, which will be made available to you. This ought to leave plenty of time for your questions. This is kind of like knitting. When you know how to do it, it looks simple, but when you don't, you realize there are lots of ins and outs. So silent brainstorming is my name for a technique that is especially helpful when you as a researcher or ministry practitioner are trying to explore a topic involving people. I value this approach because it helps to flesh out the lived experience of people about the topic that you're interested in. And today I'm going to use that topic of worship services. It helps you figure out ideas that you might not have thought of. And it does this by tapping into the experiences and the imaginations of the people that you invite to a focus group. Another thing that I like about this approach is that some of us like to talk, some of us don't like to talk, some of us are ponderers, and the silent brainstorming technique allows both introverts and extroverts to express their ideas on the topic to the group. In a focus group lingo, it gets around the big talker problem. Here's a brief overview of the method. The first thing that you need to do to employ this method is you have to have something that's worrying you, something that you want to think about, an area or topic to explore. And then you as the practitioner researcher will narrow that down and think about who the right people would be to invite to help you think about that. And then you write something called an issue statement, kind of a script that you will use for the event. You then invite participants to a focus group, and you need to tell them that it should last somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half. At the event, you reestablish that people are doing this voluntarily and tell them about the ground rules. Then you lead them through some guided imagery on your topic. And then the silent brainstorming part starts. People write down their thoughts and phrases, one idea at a time, on index cards that you provided them. Towards the middle of the event, you then literally put the cards on a table, mix them all up, and then the group helps look for patterns or categories present in those cards. Then after that, you have a lot of data points to ponder as you refine the categories and decide what to do next. Now, that sounds about as exciting as filling out your Form 1040. So to make it a little more concrete, today we're going to pretend that we are the interim pastor at 9th Presbyterian Church. Obviously, this is in a small town in North Carolina, 9th Presbyterian Church. And I want to find out more about what members think about and their experiences about Sunday worship. So the people who know about this are the regular attendees at Sunday services. So those are the folks that I'm going to invite to my session. Before the event, I will make sure that I write down what I need to tell folks. This isn't the place for improvisation, especially when you're doing it for the first time. You will spend some time creating a few meditative paragraphs of guided imagery on the topic, in this case, worship. You'll get your housekeeping in order. You'll have to have name tags, pens, and note cards. And you'll secure a location that is private enough, that has enough seating, and has table space for the group to do its job. Oftentimes, a church parlor or a Sunday school room is big enough to accommodate this. I would suggest, if you're starting to do this and haven't had a lot of experience leading groups, a group of 7 to 12 is probably big enough. It gets hard logistically to manage a group that's bigger than 15 persons. Given how busy folks are, if you want to make sure you have 10 people at the event, I would invite a couple more because people may drop out at the last minute. When you invite people, you don't have to go into great detail about why you're inviting them. The two most important things to say are, one, what the topic is. We're going to be talking about the Sunday service that you attend at 9th Presbyterian Church. And then also to stress the importance that only you know what your experiences are. And the only way that I can find out about them is if you share them with me. And basically that's what's going to happen at the focus group. All right. On the day of the event, you'll get there before the attendees, and you or your helper, if you have one, will put the coffee on and set out the donuts. And you'll set out places for people to sit that will have a pen and a stack of cards. It's a good idea to have name tags too, so you can feel comfortable calling on people by name. I've often done this with groups of people that don't know each other very well, so it's helpful for them too to have a name tag so they can address each other by name. A little chit chat before helps to break the ice and establish rapport with the group. Once you formally start the session, you want to begin by acknowledging that you've invited people to come here and that they are not being coerced and they want to play. And if something comes up in the course of the meeting that makes them feel uncomfortable and they think that they need to leave, that's perfectly fine. In some settings, for example, if you're doing this as a Doctor of Ministry project for your Austin Seminary DMin program, you would need to have written consent. That's just a standard social science practice. There are ground rules for this kind of meeting, and there are basically three of them. First, the purpose of this meeting is to have a conversation. It's not to solve a problem. It's not to change anybody's mind. And thank goodness no one's going to be making a motion and seconding it and voting on anything. This is a conversation. The second thing to stress is that you are here as a participant because I value what you have to say. And all of your opinions you get to own and talk about, and no one is going to try to talk you out of them. Or if they do, it's my job as the leader to remind them that's not what we're supposed to do here. And then finally, so that people can speak freely, we should agree together that we won't go around talking about what people said at this event. This is what we call in the focus group business as the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas ground rule. Now, if you get permission from someone to quote them, that's fine. Finally, as you begin, you want to explain what the cards are for. And I end up saying something like, you probably wondered what the cards are for. Well, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to write on the cards. And when I do, just take a card and write down one word or phrase. You don't need to take the time to write complete sentences. We're going to talk about what everyone writes down on the cards. The next thing that you do at the event is to introduce the topic. We're here today to talk about your experiences as worshipers at Ninth Presbyterian Church. And I want to hear from you because you are regular attendees at church. And I just want to find out what's going on because I'm the interim pastor now. Then you lead people into some guided imagery about the topic, in this case, going to worship. And I generally do this just with words. And I ask people to close their eyes, take a breath, and then I slowly lead them through a few sentences about the worship experience. Imagine you're coming up to church on Sunday morning. What are you anticipating? What do you see? What happens when you enter the building? Does someone greet you? Do you see an old friend? And then just slowly walk through the worship service from beginning to end, concluding with, and now you're leaving worship. What's happening? Who are you talking to? How do you feel? I hope that this will help people tap into their memories of going to church. Now, there is a variation on guided imagery, which involves using images. And I have done this from time to time. In this case, you wouldn't ask people to close their eyes, but as you talk about the parts of the service, you'd have appropriate images, such as people standing in the narthex, or a choir singing, or people celebrating the Lord's Supper, or that kind of thing. Both of them can work. Images can be very powerful, especially for some folks. Now, my pro tip in all of this is that you should rehearse your guided imagery. Rehearse your guided imagery. You want to practice doing this in a semi-hypnotic way and pause to give people's minds time to bubble up ideas. The fun begins when you end the guided imagery and say, please tell me about Sunday worship at Ninth Presbyterian Church. Write down one thought or idea per card. The moment of truth has come. Will people write something down? The answer is yes. Congratulations, you know that you're on the right track because you've generated ideas that people are now sharing with you. I usually give people a stack of about 20 index cards. Some people will write that many people will write fewer. But if someone runs out of cards, be sure you have some to give them another card. This silent brainstorming part will go on for several minutes, longer if you've got a larger group, and a little less generally if you have a shorter group. You will sense as the leader that most people have kind of finished writing down ideas. And at that point, you say, if you're writing a card, please write down that idea, and then you can set down your pen or pencil. At this point, you or your assistant or someone in the group can collect the cards, and then you want to literally put the cards on the table, like this lovely library table in the right learning and information center. You want to mix the cards up. You don't want to keep them together for purposes of what happens next. And it's nice to put them in columns on the table. And you might need two tables next to each other if you have a lot of cards. So the next thing that happens is that you are going to have the group form these cards into some kinds of patterns or categories. Generally, what I do is divide the group in half somehow, counting 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then I have all the ones come up and I give them the direction. I want you to find the cards that belong together and to organize them into categories by columns. So go up and look at the cards for a couple of minutes, and you'll start to see relationships between the cards. Start to group those into categories. To make it more fun, do this without talking to anybody. People can do this. There will be pointing and shoulder tapping, but that group will start to see patterns in the cards and will organize them. You'll get a sense that they've reached their saturation point. And at that point, you then invite the second group to come up and, so to speak, be the editors of the work of the first group. They're authorized to move cards around if they want to. They could move all the cards around. Usually that doesn't happen. And then you tell them that their reward for going second is that they can talk while they engage in this sorting activity. All right. Let's take a step back and review the process so far. You've introduced the topic that you want to find out more about. You've used guided imagery to help ideas bubble up in the minds of each one in the group. Then you've asked them to write down a word or a phrase, their ideas about this topic. This is known somewhat inelegantly as the dump phase of the operation. You've also had the group form some preliminary categories, by looking at the relationships between the cards. If someone says joy, 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 happiness, that category might be emotions. They are lumping together the data. Now, a fascinating thing about this process is what it means for you as the practitioner or researcher. You are exercising a great deal of power. You picked the topic, you invited people, you primed them to think about it in a certain way. So you've exerted a lot of power over them. Yet at the same time, you haven't told them what they should or should not write down. So you've been very specific about leading a process, but you've been non-directive about the content or the results of the data points that they give you. That is, the things they write down on cards. Okay, now we've had the dump phase and the lump phase, and now the naming phase begins. The group has already created some kind of categories that make sense to them. Now it's your task as the leader of the group to look over the cards and try to see the sense that is there. You're going to lead a discussion about the cards, one category at a time. Experience shows that the best way to do this is to find the category that you think is the most homogeneous. Pick up all the cards from that category and say, you've discovered a category here, and it contains this word and this word and this word and this word, and you read all the cards. If you don't know why a card is fitting with the other words, you might say, who wrote this card? Tell me about why you said what you said. You then want the group to talk aloud together and to say, oh, this category is called emotions, or this category is called something else. Then you note that by writing it down on a card. I find that it's better to have some cards that are a different color than most of the cards, and to use those to write down the name of the category. You need to work through all of the categories one by one. And your goal here is to have the group give at least tentative names for each of the categories. You can move the cards around as necessary. And my experience is there are always cards that get moved around. Because as the group decides there are these 2 or 3 categories that they like, then they might notice that some other cards really go better with those categories than the initial category that they determined. So this is an iterative kind of process that you go through with the group. Here's a simplified example of what you hope will happen when you lead a silent brainstorming group. You hope eventually that you'll have a stack of cards that will say things like organ prelude, praise band, familiar hymns, the choir, soloist, special music. And you hope that the group will discern that all of these things have been categorized together because they have something to do with music. And so music would simply be the name of that category. Sometimes groups want to have one name or another name because they can't decide. It's perfectly fine to write down both of the names. At some point, you'll start to feel that time is getting away from you, and you'll want to make sure that you cover all the categories. Now, friends and neighbors, the naming part takes the most time of anything during the event. It will take longer than people spent writing down their individual thoughts on cards. At the end of the discussion, it's a good practice to say, well, what have we done today? Well, we created all of these ideas about worship, and we decided that they fall into, let's say, 6 categories. And one category is called music, and another category is called something else. At this point, you can pause and say, so we've spent a lot of time thinking together about this. Is it possible that there's some kind of important category or theme that we just failed to mention? You can have a conversation about that. Maybe there is, and maybe there isn't. If there is, it's important to note that, and you'll have to figure out what to do with that information. Okay. You have worked this group of volunteers very hard. You've made them think in weird and fun ways. And now you can say, go on your way rejoicing. But remember, what happens in the focus group stays in the focus group. And then I would probably say something like, I appreciate your time. This is very helpful to me as your interim pastor as I learn from you more of your thoughts and ideas about Sunday worship at Ninth Presbyterian Church. Okay. The participants are done, but you're not quite done. So after the event, you need to collect and analyze or reflect on your data. The most important thing to do is to not turn on a large fan and blow all the cards all over the place so you don't know what the categories are. I bring Ziploc bags with me and scoop up all the cards from one category and put them together safely for analysis. You need then to look at the names for all the categories. And you want to discern, are these names accurate? Do they really capture what's going on with the cards? Well, most of the time they do. Sometimes you'll want to revise the name. It's then a good practice to write down a definition for each theme or each category so that you understand in your mind what you mean by saying music. In this case, music would be all the kinds of music that people experience during Sunday worship at Ninth Presbyterian Church, that kind of thing. They're usually not very elaborate. Now, you may have had a few orphan cards. That happens. You also can then say, oh, I now realize that this card does have a parking place, and you can move it into another category if you want to. If there are themes that you think were important, but were not mentioned by participants, you need to take note of that. The absence of a theme might mean that it was so obvious that no one thought of it, or it might mean something else. But that's something for you to ponder uh, as a researcher. Well, you've gotten a lot of data from a group of participants at your silent brainstorming focus group. What are your next steps? They're up to you. Did you find out all the information you needed as the interim pastor at Ninth Pres, and you don't need to collect any more data? That's fine. If you wanted to do follow-up interviews to probe in more detail about some aspect of the theme that you discovered, you can use the themes and their definitions as open-ended questions for follow-up interviews. And when doing that kind of interviewing, I would say something like, 2 weeks ago, we had a great time. We had a focus group of people who come to church at Ninth Pres, and they shared a lot of ideas about worship. And one of the ideas that they shared about the worship experience was the atmosphere of the church, how happy people seem to be there. What's your experience of the atmosphere during worship? They may agree with what people said in the group, or they may have their own ideas. That's perfectly fine. But the themes discovered in the focus group give you a way to further the conversation. The important thing about these themes, I think, is that these ideas didn't come from you, or they didn't come from a book that you read in seminary about the Orthodox way to worship. They come from people who worship, or regular Christians, and their own lived experience. So their ideas sometimes supplement your own experience, the way you were taught in seminary, or your own firmly held views about a topic. Now, we use worship as one example. As I get to the end of my remarks here, let me share a couple of examples from research that I have done. I've used this technique several times with Doctor of Ministry students, and I've asked them to tell me about preaching, since they are preachers. And when I did this in 2022, the group came up with the themes of preparation, involving Bible study and thinking about the sermon, stories. Stories were very important to them, part of what they say in a sermon. They also were concerned about the context of hearers. They were concerned about what kind of authority am I using as a preacher. Preaching the word of God is a big deal. And then finally, they also wrote a bunch of cards about the emotions that they feel associated with preaching the sermon. Different kind of example, bigger study that I did, I asked ministers, working ministers in congregations, tell me what it's like to be a minister serving a congregation. And the themes that were commonly expressed across the groups were the themes of well-being or self-care, the minister's emotions, the task of leading a congregation, of caring for people in the congregation, of relationships that you have, which are different enough from caring that it was its own theme. And then finally, the theme of pastoral maturity, how the minister themselves is changed because of experiences in ministry. So this method can be used across a broad variety of topics. You're not the expert, the participants are. You're the person who's figured out a way to help them share their insights with you. Now, I have more to say about this, and all the world would get tired of hearing it, but I've written some of this down in a book, Qualitative Research, a Field Manual for Doctor of Ministry students, and I go into detail about this technique on pages 137 and following in the book. This is an open access book from Atla Open Press, and you can download it for nothing. If you like books, It is available on Amazon.com. And I've also included my email address there. And at this point, Melissa, I have talked way too long, and I'm going to stop my sharing, and we can have questions.
Thank you so much, Timothy. So clear, and I just feel like I could go out, and I think I could just do one right now with y'all here on this screen. Which actually brings me to a question. Can you do this online and in a Zoom room? And while, I'd love to hear you talk about that and invite others. If you have a question, we'd love to see you back on camera if you're able to do that, and you can raise your hand and we will take questions from the group. So Timothy, how do you do this, and can you or not? I don't see how you could in a Zoom setting.
I think it'd be challenging to do all of the parts on Zoom. I could see how people could do the silent brainstorming part and type a bunch of ideas into the chat, which would kind of go crazy. But since you can record the chat log, you could pull data from that. I think it would be challenging to have the group do the arrangement of categories in an online space. Now, probably someone is typing in the chat now that there's some cool online tool that would let you do that. But I've only done this in a face-to-face setting, because as you start talking about things, it's very helpful for people to be spontaneous about it.
Yeah, yeah. So I know there is a tool called Padlet where people can put electronic Post-it notes and then move them around. So that could potentially work, but it doesn't really address the dynamic that happens as people start talking to each other and generating ideas. So
yeah, and that's
challenge.
probably the fun part for the participant, is getting to talk about what they said and so on. I did do this once where I actually had to invoke the rule. Now remember, we're not getting into an argument, and we're not trying to change someone's mind about something. What this person said is her experience, and what you think is your experience. So it draws on all your facilitation skills, which you have honed over the years as a pastor. So.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it also could potentially create some connection among people in the congregation who probably don't, have this same group of people talking about worship in this open-ended ways. I think that could be an internal good of the process.
Sure.
Well, Libby has put a comment up here, no question, but I appreciated the information. She likes the idea that participants create the categories rather than the researchers. And I think that's right. And I think that's great to give people ownership of what is going on. Carlos has a question. Once the data is collected, how do you interpret the data and make sure you are measuring or interpreting what you think you're measuring or interpreting?
Great question. So in the world of social scientists, there are two tribes. They're like the Hatfields and the McCoys. And they're called the quants and the quals. And the quants are the number people. And the quants want giant random samples, and they want to be able to run regression equations on their data. The qualitative people are more interested in people's feelings and the textures of human experience. I've seen more than once in medical research about patient experience. These are generally written by nurses, but they will say, the doctors like empirical quantitative data, but as nurses, we value qualitative data that helps us better understand the feelings of our patients. So another way of getting at this question is, why is this data reliable? Well, the data The data is reliable to the extent that you have asked an intelligible research question and you have found people who are appropriate to talk about that research question. In qualitative research, this is referred to as a purposeful sample. For some kinds of research, I might only want to interview women, or I might only want to interview men, or I might only want to interview Presbyterian pastors in Iowa. But as long as I'm asking a question that fits that group of people and I can talk to them, then the data is reliable. You're not asserting every single member of Ninth Presbyterian Church would say what you discovered in your focus group. But you would say, this is the best data we have that talks in general ways about what's going on with worship at Ninth Presbyterian Church. And it is very different from the kind of data that you might get by asking people to survey where they check a box. You know, I will never do this. How inspiring was Pastor Tim's sermon? Not inspiring, somewhat inspiring, very inspiring, you know. That feels a bit odd to me. But this approach doesn't fit every kind of research topic that you might have. Now, another point about reliability is, are these the right themes? That is, are these interpretations sensible? You asked the group to create the themes, so it is what the people have chosen, and that is, in my view, less arbitrary than me just deciding what the categories might be. Now, there's another kind of categorization called coding to theory that people use, where they know the categories ahead of time, and that's useful too. This approach just is from the ground up. It lets the implicit knowledge of the group kind of bubble up and then become more explicit.
Well, there is in the chat a link to a feedback form. We would love to get your feedback on this session and on other things you may be interested in. And I'm so heartened that you're here to learn this really creative way to build community and get and learn what's going on with people. So Timothy, we are very grateful. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I hope that many of you will be back next week when we will be with Professor Phil Helsel, who's going to talk about flourishing, positive psychology, and ministry. He's going to talk about how cultivating emotions can build joy, wonder, gratitude, alleviate burnout, and lead to flourishing in multiple domains. All of this in 25 minutes, folks. You can't afford to miss it. So thank you. Blessings to you as you go through the rest of this day and this week. Bye-bye.